Hey, I'm Jesse.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
On this episode, which will be a two-parter, we're talking about what happens when your therapist has an emergency or a crisis or something bad happen. And how does clients respond to it? And how do we respond to it?
It's a very thematic episode because it's basically what we have just had happen with this podcast, where we needed to take some time off because there was a family emergency. And so we thought this happens with therapy, with the
Mhm.
therapist and the clients all the time. So let's take some time to talk about it and think about the impact of it. Let's just kind of start with saying, like, what does it mean to say a therapist had an emergency?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There could be a lot of different things that can come up. Sometimes we'll say emergency when we're having a fight with our partner and we don't have bandwidth to navigate clients. Sometimes we'll say emergency, which is what happened for me when my family member died in my family. And I had to immediately be on for other family members and also navigate that. And so it can be kind of extreme, death in the family. It can be something that's like when we don't have capacity, when there's a crisis. It can also be obviously something to do with injury, things like that. Anything that'll pull us out of the role of therapist for a second that isn't, yeah, that's not good, and that we might not be able to do our job quite right in that moment as we deal with our own stuff.
It's exactly what I was kind of thinking is like the overall kind of decision of when we're going to cancel last minute or cancel for a significant chunk of time, and call that an emergency is just exactly as Jesse was saying there. Like we just know that we're not going to be able to really show up as a therapist. Such a big part of our job is that we're able to park our stuff at the door and be 100% available to the client. And so if we're going to be checking our phone to see, an illness update from a family member, or, we're too sick to really be able to function. Um, or we have something interpersonal going on that we're like, don't want to be sitting with a client and the whole time thinking about the fight we just had or the fight we're about to have. We've all had need to call out of work and any kind of job because something came up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oftentimes, we're going to get into the therapist POV in part two, but one of the things that anybody listening just want to like not bury the lead is that it's usually because we care about our clients. Um, and that in a very real way, they come first. And so the question we usually ask ourselves is like, can I be fully here? Can I do justice to what someone else is bringing?
Mhm.
If the answer is no, that isn't really often to do with the client. It's to do with us wanting to have that kind of capacity and care that we hold ourselves to that level and that we're not going to meet it at this moment.
hmm hmm But that said, that reality stated, and that being the way that we practice, it still brings up feelings for clients when the therapist can't be there for whatever reason. And sometimes we can tell you the reason, and sometimes we can't. And
Mm,
sometimes we'll tell you the reason when we get back,
yeah.
and sometimes we won't. So I think especially when there's some kind of uncertainty for the client. There's a lot of different reactions. They get significant impact about this. So we want to talk about some things that we've heard and observed in our client work about how they're impacted by it.
Mm,
Just as you were saying, essentially, Jesse, like there are reactions from the client that they may end up kind of feeling like, oh, is this somehow about me? Am
yeah.
I too much? Does my therapist need a break from me? Especially if the client often feels that they're too much for other people, or maybe if something big happened to come up the session before a therapist had to
Yeah.
cancel, where they felt like they were more vulnerable than usual, or they figured out something big, or maybe they had a reaction towards a therapist about something else and they got angry or disappointed or or upset in the session. And then the therapist cancels, and it can be easy to kind of interpret that as like, oh God, Ryan's sick of me. Ryan needs a break.
Mhm. Yeah. Especially, yeah, as you perfectly said, if it's vague,
Hmm.
oh, I've seen that where a client might be like, maybe I should be less. Um, this will often happen with clients I've noticed that have probably had a history of being told they're extra, they're too much,
Hmm.
of being punished for big feelings, often by parents, or if parents kind of yell when they've had something major happen so that their feelings have really been disenfranchised or taken away from them. And we learn to interpret the world through, in a lot of ways, a self kind of centered lens because we've had to. Because we're looking for safety, we're looking to see where danger is, where conflict might be, where we might have gotten in trouble or let someone down. Well, and then we have this vague email from a therapist.
Hmm.
It's very easy for that to be like, are they subtly telling me they don't want to see me?
Right. Yeah. And that, has those feelings of abandonment that can come up. Whatever kind of explanation we might have come up with in our minds to make it make sense, there can still just be that underlying feeling of like, oh, okay, now I've been kind of ditched. I've been left alone with all this stuff that I was trying to work through. Um, just like that same feeling, like with the example of childhood that you gave, Jesse, of like, I punished for having big feelings by being isolated. No one wants to talk to me now. I got sent to my room and shamed and just kind of abandoned with that big feeling. And
Mm.
that's where it can kind of tap into transference as well,
Mm.
where it's kind of reenacting unintentionally, but on the therapist side and the client side, it's kind of reenacting that um, big feeling and then punishment abandonment cycle or
Yeah.
different kind of emotional cycles that the client has experienced in their life.
And linked to that, that is really related, is might be as soon as I get close to somebody, they leave me.
Mm,
So it might be a little less about it's my fault, but like, here I go again. As soon as I start to kind of give you some of my trust, or as soon as we start to build something, you're not reliable. That can be a big one when it comes to abandonment and that transference piece. That's just a flip to that.
hmm. I think there's something in this that all people struggle with uncertainty, the unknown, and it's something we end up working with in therapy a lot. That often clients, especially at the beginning of therapy, and sometimes throughout therapy, really struggle with the uncertainty and the kind of unknown things of like, well, this person never gave me closure. I never found out why someone stopped dating me or left my family, all kinds of different abandonment kind of experiences we may have had that we just don't get an answer with. Or maybe we do eventually get an answer, but it's weeks later, right? When the
Mm,
therapist comes back and then says like, okay, I'm happy to share with you that this is what happened. But
mm,
that whole time of not knowing can be agonizing. To use kind of an everyday scenario for that, it's kind of like when you text someone that you're really excited about, a friend or a potential dating partner, and the time that you don't hear back from them can be really difficult, especially if it ends up being really long. And then they might get back to you and say like, "Oh, sorry, I had a busy couple of days with work. I'd love to see you Friday." But that doesn't change how agonizing those 2 days felt, right?
absolutely.
Or they might get back to you and say like, "Hey, actually I really don't want to pursue this anymore. I don't think I'm interested in something romantic with you." And
Mm.
that even that can feel better than the
Yeah.
2 days of agonizing over like, "Just give me an answer."
Yeah. This actually points into something we've probably said more times than not, but I'm going to say it again, is that the therapy relationship is such a microcosm to the outside world. And how we are able to kind of be with clients in that uncertainty or how they're feeling about that uncertainty can often mirror our relationships with others.
Mhm.
And depending on who we are to a client or how they're going to respond to us, Yeah, there can be feelings of abandonment. What does that uncertainty mean? It could be anything, right? The therapist could either be mad at me or have something going on and I don't know. So I'm going to do what regular interpretations I usually do in these scenarios. I might
Hmm.
have anxiety about this. For others, they might not give a shit. They'd be like, yeah, peace. I didn't want to see you anyway on a Wednesday night. Like it might
Oh, we love our avoidant clients.
seem like clients genuinely care. And I think they really do, but I just wanted to give a shout out to all those who are like, not like I'm not feeling bad.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid. Like sometimes there's this that like, oh God, one less thing to do,
Yeah,
or oh, yeah, save a little bit of money this week. Like that's
yeah.
great. Like there's lots of reasons to be happy you're not seeing your therapist.
But I until I said that, I was like so excited about like how concerned clients are gonna be. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, there's like I know if my therapist said something bad, I'll be like, oh, I hope everything's okay. Sweet.
I don't even have to get out of bed.
Oh my God, it like taps into my introverted part. Like one of my favorite things in the world is when a friend cancels on me. Because I still have like all the like I'm a good friend mojo, but I also don't have to do anything to keep that. So in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm still a good client. I was gonna show up, but now I don't have to.
Hmm. So the client may also experience a feeling of superiority and success.
Yes, which also is a microcosm of the real world.
As you so aptly have demonstrated.
Ta-da! Tell me you're an introvert without telling me you're an introvert, Jesse.
Oh. With all these feelings that come up for clients, I guess let's take some time to talk about how clients might react. We could talk about it. Let's talk about it a little bit theoretically, and then we'll also share some examples as they come up too, because we've been in practice long enough that we've seen plenty of reactions in our time.
So this would be like after you're back in office. So you're having maybe like your first session with a client. Like how might a
Mm.
client feel to react? And obviously all of these are examples from our practice because this is kind of how we know that there are reactions to us going. One of the big ones I think that can come up is a protection on us. So not wanting to take up too much space or bring up a really heavy topic. Almost as if like I know you've already been through whatever that was. So in this space, maybe I shouldn't burden you.
Mm.
Um, or I guess conversely, it's not quite linked, but also think wondering if their issues are as important as whatever just happened to us.
Yeah, I guess we hear that in lots of different contexts from clients. It's kind of that like, oh, it's not that bad kind of thing, or
Yeah.
oh, the abuse or something that I experience is like, well, other people have it worse. And this is a scenario where whether because they know what the therapist experienced or because they don't know and they're guessing, they have that kind of thought of like, oh, what you just experienced must be worse than my fight with my boss or, whatever. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So yeah, not taking up that kind of space.
I've had clients literally say to me, even recently, right? Because
Mm.
I just had this emergency of, well, you can handle anything. So if you needed to take time off, it must have been bigger than whatever I'm dealing with.
Mm. Mm.
Almost as if like we're superhuman, that like because we can handle what clients are bringing, we can handle our own lives with this like extraordinary amount of resilience, which, fun fact, we know the title of our podcast.
I was about to say that's like kind of our whole mission statement here is like, no, we are not okay. No, we are not superhuman. No, we do not have healthy communication habits.
Ryan, you always bring that one up. I feel like
Because I don't have healthy communication habits, Jesse. Any further questions?
no, you always out yourself with that one.
I know, because it's something that I talk about so much in my work.
Yeah, fair. No, and I think we have so much bandwidth for our clients that it's because we can hold your story because it's yours. And one
Hmm.
of the differences with a therapist is that our story is in our inner circle. We will have different emotional ties to the very things that are impacting
Yeah.
us in the here and now. But that is a big one that clients can feel like you don't take time off. So when you do, it must be big, which
Hmm.
then to put it back onto me needing help in this space, what am I allowed, I guess?
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Um, Actually, since you recently had a chunk of time off from an emergency, I'm curious what kind of reactions you got back when you came back to the office.
Oh, good question. Okay. Okay, two pop to mind immediately.
Mm.
So the first response was just like a genuine care. I was specific. I told my clients so that they didn't worry that I had lost a family member and that I needed to take time off. And I had to also let clients know because I had to travel to be away that I didn't want to be back. Um, and there were some I actually saw when I was away because there was emergencies or whatever. There were a lot that I didn't see. And so we had this kind of uncertain period of time. It was really only a week. I had to be away. And they were all amazing. And so there was a lot of care when I got back, a lot of condolences, a lot of sometimes hesitation on how much to ask me, which is great because that's part of like the therapeutic relationship. We can kind of be there. And then there were clients that just didn't give a shit. Like, and it's kind of delightful.
So wait, Jesse. I just want to like interject here for a second. What
Yeah,
do you
Denise.
mean when you say they didn't care? Do you mean they were just like, oh, that's sad? Anyway, so my boss and I had this conversation the other day. Oh, how exactly did that conversation go?
No, that's exactly it, Denise.
But yes, how did you feel about it?
I kind of like it because in some ways, like both of them are perfectly legit, but I find when like there is a bit of bandwidth that you have to kind of be like, how, which part do I hold? How do I hold being a therapist or being a real person? I find sometimes self-disclosure with things like this, like even if you're not giving too much, it can just help a client. But then there is that part where it's still raw and you're still navigating, like, how do you talk about it? Or how do you hold boundaries once you've given a little? Like all those kinds of things that a therapist thinks about in order for a client to feel like the session's not about you. And so for clients that just kind of are like, yeah, 3 weeks ago, Jesse, when we were talking about this, I'd like to get back to that, is actually kind of refreshing because it's like, it isn't about me. This was just a giving him an excuse of why I was away. Let's focus it on you. Yeah. So those would be kind of two of the main ones.
Mm. Mm.
Wait, before I give the co-host mic back to Ryan, I'm curious, Jesse, would you say that this gave you like a sense of relief because then you could just go back into helping your clients with meeting your clients wherever they're at, which I know you've said it helps fill up your cup as well, even when you're not necessarily in the best space.
Oh, Denise, nailed it. Yeah. I think we're going to talk about a little bit of that too in part two, but there is this sense of getting to be good at this job, especially when we've had something in our personal life that can feel out of control or something that is a lot we're dealing with. I find sometimes when I'm sitting in the therapist chair, I can feel like the most real and authentic person because I'm just engaged with another person's story. It also kind of allows me to put away my
Mm.
own stuff for a second. Obviously, I'm still present. I'm still there. It's not gone. I'm not pretending. But there is an aspect of truly listening to another story where your stuff does get kind of put on a shelf for a sec. Anyone that's been in the field for a while knows that feeling where you really are therapist in that moment, and it can be a relief. Yeah.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
can be complicated to figure out how much of myself do I share as Jesse and then go into therapist. Like that can be tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are sometimes also reactions that we get where clients might cancel a session soon after we cancel, or might not come back if they felt like really dropped in an important way, um, even if we kind of invite them to come back. I'm actually thinking about an example of my own from several years ago. Um, as we've talked about before, we trained in Edinburgh.
Mhm.
And if you've ever lived in Edinburgh for a period of time, you know it's a major city, but it has very much a village vibe, right?
Yeah.
Most people walk everywhere or take the bus, so you're just going to run into people all the time in central Edinburgh. And so actually, in terms of any place that I've lived, it's where I've run into the most clients, quote, in the wild, um, at a coffee shop or just walking or at the pub or something. So there was one day when I had an injury and it was not a visible injury. Like it was not someplace that people could see. It wasn't obvious. I wasn't limping, but I was in pain, and I was also very emotional about it. And so I canceled clients that day. And actually, my dear friend, Dr. Jess Erb, was having a hangout and watching some movies with some friends, and I was telling her about this experience, and she was like, "Well, why don't you come hang out with us if you're not seeing clients tonight?" And I was like, "Okay, cool, I will." And so it was the summer. I was wearing a tank top and shorts, and I was carrying 2 bottles of wine to go to this hangout. And I walked right past the client I had just canceled on.
Oh.
And to look at me, I was like skiving off, and I was just like, screw it. I just want to go to the beach with some wine or something. There was no way to tell that I was injured, and it wasn't the kind of injury that I wanted to share with someone either. So I never saw that client again.
Oh man, they totally would have thought that like you abandoned them to go have fun.
Yep. And it
Ooh.
was a situation where there were kind of like some abandonment experiences were pretty big for the client. And
Yeah.
so it was a way that I failed that client that I was never able to repair.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff does sometimes happen with emergency cancellations. It's definitely rare. It's the exception. It's not every day that you run into your client in a tank top carrying wine.
No, but what an imagery. I love that. Also,
I,
unseasonably warm in Edinburgh.
I know it was the summer. Truth was
Uh,
probably it was like 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was just desperate to pretend it was the summer.
uh, the summers in Edinburgh where you always wear a jacket.
That's right.
I think that what you're talking about is interesting because it kind of links to that aspect of us taking holidays.
Hmm.
Most psychotherapists know this, or at least we've read it in books, maybe we've experienced it, where taking a holiday can sometimes be actually quite a trigger for clients because it can signal that life is more important elsewhere than you and the clients navigating stuff. It can feel like abandonment. It can also feel like you got other stuff going on. Maybe they're not as important to you. Like there's a lot of reasons why a client might feel abandoned. And we know that sometimes after we've taken holidays, some clients might cancel their next 2 sessions. And it can be a really cool part of this rupture and repair. Even though holidays are a very natural thing, it can feel like a rupture for the client. And you can talk about it. That like and usually there's some really cool material that comes up in therapy as you're repairing this rupture. Um, for some, it's like, who did you go with that might be more important than me? And all those things. And an emergency, I wonder if it's a like kind of almost this a similar feeling of being dropped by something. But I don't know, like, would clients even be able to say that they feel dropped? Like, could the rupture even happen in that moment? Because it's like, well, you have a legit excuse, and the legit excuse isn't positive.
Right. I hear what you're saying, that it's kind of like, how can I be mad at you for dropping me when I know that your family member has passed away?
Yeah, like, can I still feel abandoned and you had a legit not happy
Mm.
excuse for that? Whereas on holidays, it's like, you went to go have fun, right?
Right. It's easier to
Ryan,
be upset about that.
And you're the perfect catalyst for both. Like you have an emergency that's like kind of devastating. You're going to go try to like soothe yourself, but you look
Mhm.
like you're having a baller
I
time while
look like
doing
I'm
it.
gonna, which, is just how I look. So, can't hold
It's
that against
actually
me.
very true. It's very, very true. Always look like that.
It is that, yeah, it's a socially unacceptable time to be like angry at someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I'm thinking about it in
Mm,
terms of like when we're allowed to actually say something.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, that gaslighting of ourselves and our emotions that we can do. That empathy that can sometimes get in our way. Empathy sometimes can be quite negative when we justify the actions of somebody that's hurting us, etc. But that
Mm,
empathy can also get in the way when we're like, oh, but they have a really, like, something really big is happening. Maybe I disenfranchise my own feelings because I'm not actually allowed to feel sad
mhm.
or impacted by this.
Yeah, and I think it's something that comes up a lot in therapy in other ways as well, where people maybe hesitate to share their frustrations with their partner or their parents or some important friendship because they're like, well, it wasn't that bad, or they were
Mm.
there for me in other ways, or I felt abandoned as a kid, but it's because one of my parents was, always sick. And so
Mm.
you can't be mad at them for being sick. And where it kind of comes into like, well, the point isn't to be mad at them. We can acknowledge that we love them and we care about them, and that because of this thing we didn't get our needs met. But that can feel hard to bring up. It can bring up a lot of feelings of like guilt to be mad at someone who
Yeah.
was doing their best.
Hmm. And again, that aspect of how this can tie into real life. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. And I guess it's similar to like even in the more micro example of like you're raising a family with your partner and your partner gets sick and now you're taking care of everyone and your partner's not like pulling the weight they would usually pull.
Mm.
And there can be, I know a lot of people who have resentment when other people are sick. They're like, oh, well, now we can't do our thing and you canceled and you're not helping me, but they're not really able to say it because that's generally not socially acceptable.
Yeah. And I really like that example of the pain and anger and betrayal of a parent maybe being sick.
Hmm.
And that you didn't get to be raised and get to be a kid and get to have all these things that maybe your other peers got to have because maybe your parent had a very bad illness. And you're in therapy later on and you're like, am I allowed to be angry about this thing because it was a travesty? That's an excellent, excellent point. Because that could link into maybe why you're feeling a certain way about a therapist emergency. Like you're abandoning me again. And those parallels that happen in the here and now and the then and there. And how do we merge those two to say both can exist at the same time? You're totally allowed to feel abandoned and to be angry. And it might not be the person's fault. Like both can
Yes.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And when that happens, in with a reenactment with your therapist is where there's the greatest potential for a repair or a healing experience because you can possibly talk about it with your therapist in a way where they're not defensive and you're not defensive and you can kind of just say what you need to say in a way that maybe you'll never be able to your parent or whatever the other attachment figure is that you have this anger or resentment with. So it can kind of be an avenue to get some of that frustration out, to just express and explore that. Um, yeah, absolutely. I think I'm tying it even like, with mental health as well. Like if you have a parent who's very depressed, it can
Mm.
also be an abandonment and also be something that you're not supposed to be like, God, I'm so annoyed that my mom's sad all the time. But of course you feel let down and you feel abandoned, and often that is a parentifying kind of thing as well, where clients experience, now I have to take care of you. And that might be showing up with the clients that are asking a lot about if we're okay or are trying to be small and not take up space.
Absolutely. What an interesting point that, like, in some ways, that caretaker role that a lot of people find themselves into can also come up with us. That
Mhm.
tentative, like, how can I care for you? probably might be a really good role fit because myself included actually. So I'll be completely in this as well. Like being in therapy can be quite jarring when you've been a caretaker and been in a caretaker role for so long. All of a sudden those 50 minutes are just yours. How do you not ask about the therapist, like how they're doing? Like how do you not make this reciprocal or turn it towards them because maybe you're more comfortable listening, right? Like a
Mhm.
lot of clients have had this where this is finally their space to be free, and that freedom can feel kind of daunting. And
Mhm.
caretaker role is really comfortable.
Yeah.
Interesting. We are going to talk about this kind of here and now relationship between therapist and client. And what we wanted to do was kind of start doing two-parters just so we can really dive into each topic. And so I want you guys to join us next week in part two, where we get to dive into the therapist POV. How do we feel? What kind of insecurities might we have? Um, what goes on for us when we have to say goodbye?
Mhm.
What might be our own shadows of doing that and not being this omnipotent, perfect counselor? Like, what do we actually have to navigate when we have to admit we can't do it right now? And so that part's gonna be really deep. And then we'll go into that dynamic between client and therapist. We've already hinted at some of it in the client's
Mhm.
POV. What happens in our way? What's that back and forth happening? And so we'll give that some time in part two. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining us back.
Thanks for joining us. Can't wait for you to tune in and hear more about how we're not okay.
In an emergency. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.